Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning into our video. Stitch just wanted to show you his beautiful new mask that one of our students sent us. It covers him so he can now go out in public to the park like he wanted to, so thank you for that. Today we're going to go over the next two activities for both Monday and Tuesday. I believe they're activities 11 and 12, adding and subtracting mixed numbers. I'm going to do that by sharing my screen and going over a couple of the questions for you. So I'm going to start that right now. Okay, and then when I pulled this number up, so this is number 2 on your worksheet, and it's 6 2/10 plus 3 5/12. The first step I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the whole numbers. Whoopsies. I'm going to ignore the whole numbers in front of the fractions just for a couple minutes. When you're adding fractions, it's easier if you ignore those whole numbers at first. And then I would recommend taking your fractions and writing them a little bit bigger so that you can see them. So I wrote down 2/10 and I wrote down 5/12. And I'm going to just be adding these and I'm ignoring the whole numbers on the top. So when I'm doing that, I'm looking at 12 and 10 and I'm realizing there's not really a big number to go with here. So I'm going to just multiply the bottom together. So I'm going to take the 12 and I'm going to multiply it. So I'm going to do times 12. Oops. I'm going to do times 12 here to both the top and the bottom, so the numerator and the denominator. And then over here, I'm going to do times 10 to both the numerator and the denominator. So what's that's going to look like is I'm going to multiply here, I'm going to multiply here, I'm going to multiply here, and I'm going to multiply here. Now I'm going to write my final fractions down here in the bottom so it's more organized. So I'm going to start with the first fraction, and I'm going to do 12 times 2, which is 24, and then 12 times 10, which is 120. So there's my first fraction. And then my second fraction, I'm going to do 5 times 10, which is 50, and then 12 times 10, which is 120. And now I finally have some common denominators here, which makes this extremely easy to finish. So remember, I'm adding, and these are fractions. So I've got common denominators. Now it makes this super easy. I just add straight across. So 50 plus 24 is 74. And then the bottom number always stays the same. I don't need to add the bottom numbers together. So I ended up with 74 over 120. But remember, we have to go back in and we have to add the mixed numbers, so the whole number on the other part. So we have to put 74 over 120. And now I need to go back in and add my whole numbers, which is 6 plus 3, which will give me 9. But I'm looking at this and I'm realizing that this can actually be simplified. And I can simplify these by dividing it by 2. 74 ends in 2, which means it's even, or sorry, ends in 4, which means it's even. This means it's divisible by 2. So I did 74 and I divided it into 2 and I got 37. And then 120, if I take 120 and divide it in half, I will get 60. So I'll end up with 37 over 60. And then the 9 in the front is going to stay the same. And this is my final answer. So if you did this correctly, you should have ended up with 9 and 37 over 60. So here is one question done. Yay. All right, let's jump to the next one. All right, so the next adding fractions I'm going to do, or adding mixed numbers, is number 5 on your activity sheet. And this is 8 4/5 plus 5 2/4. And I'm going to use the exact same strategy I used last time. So I'm going to ignore the whole numbers in front just for a couple minutes. And I'm just going to target the fractions. So I'm just looking at adding those fractions. I'm going to write them bigger so I can see them. So I have 4/5 and 2/4. And I'm adding them. Oops. Okay, and this is the exact same strategy I'm going to use last time. I'm going to multiply the numbers against each other. So I'm going to take this 4 and I'm going to multiply over here against both the numerator and the denominator. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. I'm going to take the 5 and I'm multiply it by both the numerator and denominator on the other side. So that's going to look like this. So I'm going to do 4 times 4. I'm going to do 4 times 5. I am going to do 5 times 2. And I'm going to do 4 times 5. And when I do that, I should end up with new fractions that have common denominators, so common bottom numbers. 4 times 4 is 16, and then 4 times 5 is 20. And then if I'm adding the other one, 2 times 5 is 10. And then 4 times 5 is 20. And then we have common denominators. Oops. Okay, so I did 5 times 2 is 10, and then I did 4 times 5 is 20. So this is what I'm left over with here. So now I'm just going to add. So I'm going to add my top numbers. 16 times 10 is 26. And then my bottom number stays 20. And then I realize that this is what they call an improper fraction. So we have to convert it. So let's do that really quickly. So I'm going to ask myself, how many times does 20 go into 26? And that should be 1 time with 6 left over. So I'm going to end up with a fraction of 1 and 6 over 1 and 6/20. And this can actually still be simplified because 6 and 20 are both even numbers. So if I took 6 and divided it in 2, I would get 3. And then if I took 20 and divided it by 2, I would get 10. So now I have 1 and 3/20. Or I'm sorry, 1 and 3/10. But don't forget that we still have to add in the 8 and the 5. So 8 plus 5 plus 1 is 14. So your final answer is going to be 14 and 3/10. Okay, so now I've done 2 adding questions. I'm now going to go into subtracting fractions, which I find are a little bit harder. And with these questions, you're going to have to borrow from the whole numbers. So I like to at first just, again, the same thing with adding fractions. I ignore the whole numbers, and I'm just going to find common denominators this time. So I'm going to do the exact same thing where I'm going to write out just the fractions bigger so I can see them. And then I'm going to find a common denominator. I'm not going to be subtracting just yet. All I want to do is find a common denominator. So in order to do that, I'm noticing here that 16 and 8 are duplicates. They're doubles. So what I would do is I can take 16 times 2 times 8 is 16. So I'm only going to multiply this side by 2 because then I will get my common denominator. So I'm going to take 2 times 4, and I'm going to take 2 times 8, giving me the same common denominator, 16. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. So I'm going to do 2 times 8, and I'm going to get 4, and I'm going to get 8. And then I'm going to get 8 times 2, I'm going to get 16. So what I did was I took 2 times 4, and I got 8, and then 2 times 8 and I got 16. So now I have common denominators here, and I would normally be subtracting these, but we run into a boo-boo. You cannot take 5 from 8, that's impossible. So this is where you're going to borrow from the whole number up here. So my whole number up here is 7. I need to borrow from the 7. So I'm going to make the 7 a 6, and I'm going to borrow one whole number. So it's going to be 16 over 16. And I'm just going to add fractions just like normal. So this bottom number will stay the same, and it's going to stay 16. And then I'm going to take 16 plus 5, and I'm going to get 21. Now this is much easier to subtract. I can take 21 and subtract 8, and I will get 13. And then the bottom number is going to stay the same. So I took 21, which is my new fraction here, 21/16. And I'm going to subtract the 8 where I got the 13. And the bottom number, the 16, is going to stay the same. But remember, as we did with the adding mixed numbers, we can't leave these alone. So now I have to take 6 minus 4. It's not 7 anymore because I borrowed from that. So I'm going to take 6 minus 4. And I'm going to put the 2 down here. And your final answer is 2 and 13/16. All right, I'm going to do one more final question. I need to clear my board real fast. And I'm now going to be doing number 5 on your activity sheet. This one's a little bit difficult, but we can do it together. All right, so same thing. I'm going to ignore the whole numbers until I get a common denominator. And then I'm going to write the fractions bigger on the bottom. So I've got 1/6, and I've got 5/7, and I'm subtracting these. Okay, and when I find a common denominator, I need to multiply the bottoms by each other. So I'm going to take the 6 and move it over here, and I'm going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 6. So I'm going to do 5 times 6 and 7 times 6, and then vice versa on the other side. The 7 is going to come over here, and I'm going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 7. So I'm going to do 7 times 1 and 7 times 6. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, creating some new fractions. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take 7 times 1 and get 7, and then 6 times 7 will get me 42, and there's my new fraction. And then I'm over here, I'm going to do 5 times 6, which will get me 30, and then 7 times 6, which gets me 42. And these are my new fractions right here. But just like in the last problem we had, you can't take 7 from 30. That's impossible. So we need to go back up to our mixed number, and we've got to borrow from this 4, making it a 3. And if I do that, now I've got a whole number over here, which is going to be 42 over 42, giving me ability to add to that 7. So 42 and 42 means I'm adding these fractions. This is going to stay the same. The bottom number will be 42. And then I'm going to add the top, 42 plus 7, and I'll get 49. And now I've got 49 over 42 minus 30 over 42. And this is much easier to subtract because they have the exact same denominator. So I'm going to take 49 minus 30, and I'll get 19. My bottom number is going to stay 42. And then don't forget up here, we got to go back and we got to take 3 minus 2, and I'll get 1. So my final answer here was 1 in 1942s. Alrighty, thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure when you're subtracting fractions that you're looking at and making sure you can subtract. You can't take 7 from 30. You have to borrow from the whole number in front in order to be able to do that. All right, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time.